In this lesson, we're going to build the controls for the pilot. Alright, so seeing how we've built a seat and a console, it only seems fitting to go ahead and create some sort of controls for the pilot. Now, we don't know if this is going to be seen in an animation or anything like that, but it's kind of a neat little feature to add in, simply because we can learn some new modeling techniques with it. So let's go to our top view really quickly. And I want to create a cylinder. So go to the Create panel, Geometry, Cylinder. And I want to create a cylinder that's about the radius of the joystick that I'm looking to create. So let's go to something like 0.3. And our height will go to 2.5. Okay. So we've created a cylinder here that looks pretty good. I think that will work for us. I think that'll give us the result that we're looking for. Might go a little bit higher on that height, so let's go ahead and go to 3 on that. Now I've also taken the height segments and the cap segments down to 1, and let's make sure that our sides are set to 8 on this, because with this cylinder, if we make it lower resolution as far as sides go, it's a lot easier to deal with. Normally if you get a sphere or a cylinder with a lot of sides, even at up to 18 sides or so, that can be really difficult to deal with and try to model something. So lower resolution, usually about 8 sides, is about as low as I want to go. Okay, but it's really easy to work with. So let's go to our front view, and let's go ahead and convert this to editable poly. And I'm going to go to Edge Mode and use Marquee Selection and select all of those edges there. And I'm going to use the Connect tool to create some segments in here. So I'm going to take my segments up, and we'll go to something like 6. And I'm going to hit OK on this. And I'm going to deselect this top segment right here. Okay, so hold Alt and use a Marquee Selection and to deselect that. And then I'm going to open my chamfer settings, and you'll see that something's weird is happening to my model. And what's happening is the chamfer amount is just way too high. So let's take that down to 0 and then just bump that up to something like 0.04. Alright. Now chamfer, as you can see, it will take your selection and split it into 2. So with Edge Mode, this is a great way for creating things like little notches or grooves in an object. Now that we have these segments here, what we can do is we can go to Polygon Mode, and we can select one edge or one polygon here and hold Shift and select the next one to select that loop. Let's hold Control to select this one, and then hold Shift to select that loop. So we're going to continue to do that all the way down. Hold Control to append your selection, and then hold Shift to create a loop from that selection. Now with this, let's go ahead and use Extrude. And here you'll see that it's extruding in very odd directions. And if you'll remember from whenever we created the fans, we had a little bit of a problem with this same type of extrusion. So it's the extrusion type that we're worried about. So we need to change it from group to local normal. Now that is the wrong direction. I want to take it in to create some grooves, so we're going to go into a negative direction. And we're going to go into something, let's go to around 0.07, negative 0.07. Okay, and then we'll hit OK. Alright, so we've got the grooves that we want, and now what I want to do is I want to just create kind of a larger shape on top here. So I'm going to take this edge right here and double click on that, so that way I have that loop. And I'm going to grab my Move tool and just drop that down. And then I'm going to take those polygons right here, hold Shift to select that entire loop, and I'm going to scale that along the X and Y. And I'm just making the top of that joystick just a little bit larger. Okay, looks good. I'm going to grab the top polygon and move that down. So grab your Move tool and just pull that down some. And then I'm going to inset this. Okay, and make my inset amount to something, let's say right around 0.08, and I'll hit OK. And then I'm going to extrude this in a negative direction, inset again. This time I'm going to do something like 0.04, make that a really small groove in there, and then I'm going to extrude in a positive direction to create something that looks kind of like a button on top of this control. Okay, so 0.15 might be pretty good, and we'll hit OK. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and smooth it out and see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, and we'll do Turbo Smooth. Alright, and that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and take our iterations up and then Isoline Display. And let's go ahead and start to add some segments to tighten up those details again. So Editable Poly, Show End Result, and I'm going to go to Edge Mode, go to Edit on our Graphite Modeling Tools, and then Swift Loop. And I'm just going to come across these edges here and just make some quick cuts, just to bring back some of that volume and that hardness that I was looking for. Alright, great. So let's go back up to the top here. Let's do the same thing there, also around these edges. Okay, and then also the top of the button here. There we go. It looks like we created a couple of segments right here by accident. So if that ever happens, just double click on those loops and hold Control and Backspace. That's the great thing about the Swift Loop tool, is that if you accidentally create a loop, it's really easy to get rid of them by double clicking on them and then Control Backspace. So there we go. We now have our joystick back to its original shape. Alright, now you'll notice that this polygon across the top is an n-gon. Okay, an n-gon is a polygon with more than 4 sides. And what we want to do is we want to go ahead and close that off. So I'm going to turn off that Turbo Smooth, and I'm going to set this topology up correctly. So let's use our cut. So right click and cut, and we're going to cut from this vertex to here, and we'll right click, and then we'll cut from this one to here. So you can see that cutting with such low resolution geometry, especially if it's going to be smooth, is much easier to work with than trying to deal with 18 sides and trying to create lots and lots of cuts. Now whenever you use that cut tool, it's always important to remember to check all of your vertices and just make sure that you don't have any that are overlapping. Okay, so if I were to turn on my Turbo Smooth, okay, we might see some issues with some of the vertices, but I think this one's okay. But with those selected, you can always come in here and use Weld, and if you use your Weld settings, you'll see here that if it's within a certain threshold, it's going to weld all those together, and that's not exactly what we want, but I do want to go to like a weld threshold of like 0.01, and that's going to guarantee that it's only going to weld any vertices that are right on top of one another. Okay, so this is looking good. It says before 337 vertices, after 337. So it's telling me that it's not going to weld anything, so I'm just going to hit cancel. Another way that you can check for isolated vertices is by going to Views, X View, and then Overlapping Vertices. Okay, and it's going to bring up this little UI right here. And whatever object you have selected, if you hit click here to update, it will tell us how many vertices are overlapping. Now it's telling us that there are 744 vertices overlapping. And I know that that's not true because some of these are within that 0.1 threshold. So if I hit click here to configure, it gives me a tolerance. So this says 0.01, and if I hit OK on that, let's update. Let's try that one more time. For some reason it's saying all of these are overlapping, and that's because of the Turbo Smooth. Let's go ahead and turn off that Turbo Smooth and let's try that again. Okay, now it says 0 vertices overlapping, so don't get tricked by that. Alright, let's turn that on, and if I want to turn off this UI, I can just simply click on Overlapping Vertices and uncheck that. Alright, so we have the joystick started, and I want to add just a little bit of characteristic to it. I want to give it kind of a bend. I don't want it to be boring and straight like this, so I want to give it kind of a bend in here. So let's use a modifier, and it's actually called bend. And actually, you know what? Let's use taper. This is going to give us a little bit of a different effect. We'll use bend in the next lesson. So let's use taper here. And taper is going to basically flare out the model from a specific point. So if I take my amount up, you'll see that that begins to flare the object here. Now it's flaring it from the bottom, or the actual gizmo center. So if I take my taper and I expand this out, I can grab this center and actually move it to where I want in the object, and that will modify the taper. Okay. Now I'm going to also apply this curve to it, and what you're going to notice is that it begins to taper from top to bottom, and this is the kind of look that I was looking for. Now again, this is also adjusted by adjusting that center. So if that center is at the very bottom, you're going to get this kind of result. So if I raise that up, this allows the taper to be most accentuated in the middle. Okay, so if I go to my front view, I can see how that's working there. Alright, now I can also take my amount up and just continue to adjust those curves and that taper amount and get the exact look that I want out of my controls. Now I think that taper amount was just a little bit too much, so let's go to like 0.6 and then drop our curve, bring that up a little bit more. Okay, good. So I'm kind of happy with that shape there. Alright, so now that we have the joystick set up, now what we need to do is we need to create the object that's going to attach it to the side of the wall. So kind of create kind of this rubber casing that would go around the base. So we're going to show you how to create that in the next lesson.